So we're going to do a really brief overview of some of the functions in Photoshop that relate to photography and image processing. But we're not going to do sort of more advanced compositing. It's really looking at some of the basic ways of enhancing photographs using this program. So generally, when I'm working with raw files, I'll use Adobe Camera Raw or Adobe Lightroom. But I've found that Photoshop has just kind of easier and better capabilities for doing things like image retouching than you can do in either of the other programs. So sometimes after doing some initial edits in Adobe Camera Raw, I'll bring images into Photoshop for some further work. But the thing about Photoshop is it's really helpful to kind of set up your files in the right way to make them easier to edit and to make changes later. Those changes are already kind of built into Adobe Camera Raw because raw images, you can go back in the program and edit any of the changes you've made to a raw file. That's not true in Photoshop if you're editing at a more basic level. So the first thing I do is make sure I'm working in the right panel, the right windows. So what I'll do is over on this side, we have these windows. If you kind of click on this little arrow right on the top here, you'll see you have a few different ways of working. You generally want to go with photography. So with photography, you have some controls and options that are specific to the images you're working on, which tend to work a little bit better. So now I'm in the photography panel. I have more options that are specific to photography. I can look at the histogram with the image to see if I'm making edits that go too far. We'll work on adjustment levels in a little bit. Under layers, this is an important one. So in Photoshop, the way you kind of control making adjustments to discrete parts of your photograph without affecting global changes, and where you still retain a copy of your photograph that's untouched within the file that you're working on, is right here under layers. So what I do is I first make a copy of my background layer. Right, so if I make a copy of my background layer, then I can do all kinds of changes to it and make alterations, but it's not going to affect the core image, the background. I still have a copy of it inside the file I'm working on to work with. So a couple ways of doing that. The easiest way is just to take this and bring it back to this little plus new layer icon, and that makes a background copy. So once I've made a background copy, I want to make sure that this particular layer I'm working on, where I'm going to be doing some cropping and other enhancement, is going to be editable later. That if I finish working on it, say I crop it and come back to it and don't really like the way I've cropped it, I could still go back and make changes to that particular layer and make adjustments. The easiest way to do that is just to right click. And when you've done that, you can kind of come through here, and right now this one says convert to a smart object, right? If I make this into a smart object, what that basically means is it's an editable layer. It's a layer that's capable of being used with smart filters or certain other tools that make it be re-editable later. So I'll go ahead and convert it to a smart object. I know it's done. I have this little icon on the bottom of it, right, that's showing me that it's now a different kind of layer. And you could right now and label this the way that you wanted so you could know what it was doing. So right now I could just call this layer crop, right? So I know this is going to be a crop layer that I'm working on. So now that we've done that, right, we're going to make sure we are going into the crop tool. So if you go up to the toolbar over here, this is the crop tool. This right here. It's sort of a familiar crop icon, or at least should be. It usually tends to be the crop function in most different software programs. So clicking on the crop tool, we have some few options. If you kind of hover over each of the edges, you have the ability to bring in towards the middle. That you can bring in from the sides as well. There are some presets from this cool tool. You can do presets, width, height, plus resolution. You can crop by, different aspect ratios. You can make crop presets that you have if you're trying to make a lot of different images the same size and resolution. You have a lot of options for that. We also have a couple other things. We're going to go over the straighten tool in a minute. We also have a few different little overlays that you can do that can be helpful. The rule of thirds one is sort of the default. You can also do grid, diagonal, golden ratio, golden spiral, etc. if you'd like. Or if you don't like seeing an overlay and it bothers you, you can just don't show it. So I'll just stick with the rule of thirds one. So when I start If I click on this initially, it'll just show me a standard rule of thirds, dividing up the image into, 3 equal portions in each direction. So generally with rule of thirds, it's a good idea to have whatever is most important in your image somewhere on one of these 4 inside portions. So if I just go ahead and do that, put this little ladybug right around here, then you can kind of refine your crop a little bit and make sure that you like it. You can go ahead and press done or just double click to apply it. Now the nice thing about this, if I go and do other changes, if I've altered anything, as long as this is open, right? The history records a certain amount depending on your presets of different steps that you've done. You can kind of just scroll back to see the changes you've made, right? And each time we go back, it changes functionality. If I don't do anything, if I just am scrolling through and looking through these, it's not gonna change anything. But once I click on one and then do something else, whatever happens after that point is gonna be kind of undone. So I'm going to click back on the crop tool to see the crop that I've had. But if I decide at some point, because I made this into a smart object and it's now an editable layer, if I decide at some point I don't like the crop that I did, all I have to do, say I've done a few things, I've gone back to it. If I go back to my crop and I click on it, right, the original information comes back. I can then keep re-cropping it a number of times without, making any changes. So this is a really useful function. I think in general, making images into a smart object, especially if you're going to do cropping, that's incredibly useful. If you wanted to save the work you've done and do additional edits to this photograph, then you're going to save this as a Photoshop document or TIFF document, because that will be able to save all of these editable layers. If you're saving this as a JPEG, it's going to be flattened and all of your work is going to be done. So even if you are planning on making a JPEG out of this, I usually save this as a Photoshop document first, so I can kind of go back and make additional changes. Then I might just make a JPEG copy out of the work that I've done. So if I go to File and I go to Save As, yes, the document cannot be saved as a JPEG without losing information. Thank you for showing that. All right, so what I'm going to do now, it's going to default this image as a Photoshop document because I have made an adjustment that is giving me layers, and JPEG images are not capable of creating layers. So right now it'll default to a PSD, Photoshop document. So if I go ahead and press save, it's now saved that. And if I want to save this additionally as a JPEG, I can say File, Save As, and now if I go ahead under Format right here, right, it's not going to give me that option because this is a, this image is already set up with layers, and as a JPEG image isn't capable of doing that. So if I go to press here and press Save a Copy, and then I unclick the layers, right now it's going to give me the ability to have whatever file format I want. So right now I've unclicked layers, no layers will be retained, and I go ahead and press save. Right now with the JPEG you have the option of doing a few different options in terms of quality. You want to save it as maximum quality. It tells you right now the size of the image. I go ahead and press OK. Then I close out of this. So now if I go back to see the image that I've created, I can say I've made a JPEG copy of this image. Here's my original. This is a JPEG copy I've created, and I still have this PSD document. So if I open up the PSD, right, it will take me right back to wherever I was before. I'm now still on the crop tool. If I click in here, you can see all of my original information is still retained. So this is a incredibly useful way of working with the crop tool and working with layers in Photoshop.